Red 2 standing by, all for lit and in the green. Welcome back to Star Wars Episode 1 Racer. For today's time trial tests and analysis, we have the battle of the big engines. It's Aldar Beedo and Mawhonic going up on the track. We'll find out about them, we'll find out about their vehicles, and we'll see just how well they do when they're put to those hot lap tests. Without further ado, let's get our introduction to Aldar Beedo rolling. Strap yourselves in, this is a detailed one. Aldar Beedo is of the Glymphid species, from the planet Plu 2. The Glymphids were involved in a long-running war against the Flogrians of Plu 4, and animosity between the two races was considerable. Beedo rose through the ranks of Glymphid assassins, proving himself extremely cruel, skilled and sadistic. He took on jobs for whoever paid the most, and pod racing was a secondary pursuit, and it needed his fair share of hitmen. While Beedo was not the most skilled pilot, his pod racer offered excellent traction, boost capacity and handling, and those huge and durable engines were very good for battering people off the track. The traction aspect would come in handy on Ando Prime, where Beedo earned track favourite status on the course eventually named in his honour, Beedo's Wild Ride. Around the time of the Boonta Classic though, one of Aldar Beedo's past jobs came back to haunt him. A while earlier he had been hired to assassinate the Flogrian crime lord Borzu Nail by smuggler Oren Nile. The job had gone smoothly, but Borzu's son Cam Nail had been working hard to track down his father's killer. He discovered that Beedo was responsible and entered the Boonta Classic to kill the Glymphid out on the track. And at the same time, Oren Nile set a rookie bounty hunter on Cam's trail. On the eve of the Boonta Classic, the Devlik racer and playboy Wan Sandage approached Aldar Beedo with a job. Having learned Beedo was the assassin who killed Borzu Nail, Sandage sought to hire the Glymphid to assassinate Sebulba on the track. Sandage offered 100,000 whoopie at first, which are smaller denominations than Trugits, and then there are Pegats, which are higher than Trugits. Beedo demanded 200,000 up front due to the danger of the job in addition to his usual fee of 100,000 Trugits. Half up front, half on completion. Of course, nobody actually managed to kill anyone during the Boonta, and the only racer who died was Rat's Tyrell. Sucks to be him. Wan Sandage somehow survived going off course and crashing into a sandcrawler, while Beedo actually managed third place. Sebulba was still alive, and Beedo vowed to finish him off at the Winter Harvest Classic on Malastare. Even then, Beedo would have no success in killing Sebulba, and Cam Nail, who had changed his name to the brilliantly imaginative Elan Mac, did not have success in killing Beedo. Despite trying to kill Sebulba once more during the broader Winter Harvest Classic events, and taking on a contract to assassinate the Jedi Master Evan Piel, Beedo failed to acquire both of his bounties. His hitman career kinda stalled a bit there. He would keep on racing through the years, having lost his contract with Wan Sandage in 29 BBY due to Sandage's death, as Devliks had very short lifespans. Elan Mac was still trying to kill Beedo and failing, while Sebulba would actually fire his bodyguard Dud Bolt and hire Aldar Beedo. In the events covered by Racer Revenge, Beedo would see a lot of success across many tracks, often holding the record for knockouts in races while still posting fairly capable lap times. His greatest successes came on the world of Gamor, holding several speed and knockout records on the Watchtower Run course. Beedo's pod was destroyed twice over the course of the story, but he nonetheless performed very well and ultimately cost Team Topagalis his arm. Cam Nail would eventually have Beedo captured on Barunda in 22 ABY, but problem is, he was ultimately exposed as a crime lord due to the fact the capture was in full public view, and these issues, along with many others, would ultimately put the sport of pod racing into great question for the general public. And that's the story of Aldar Beedo. Cam Nail never did actually manage to kill him. Aldar Beedo's pod racer is very close to having the longest engines on the circuit. These Manta Ram Air Mark IV flat twin turbojet engines measure in at 10.59 metres long, only 8 centimetres shorter than Team Topagali's. So it really makes you wonder if there is a little bit of competition about who's longer when it comes to pod racing engines. It's entirely possible they are compensating for something. Anyway, the cockpit itself is 5.28 metres long, which makes this a fairly large racer. It might look a bit bulky and cumbersome, but those engines could deliver a top speed of 823 kilometres an hour, not miles. During the Winter Harvest Classic, a series of races which took place shortly after the Boonta Classic, Beedo would be seen using a modified version of these engines that had only one jet per engine, which meant they were much better on narrow courses. Beedo's stats are pretty well balanced all round. They're not spectacular, but at the same time they're not entirely crummy except for that really, really horrible acceleration. So let's see what he's like when he starts getting those parts upgraded. Interestingly enough, Beedo is shown to be reasonably tall here, despite the fact he's listed as being 1.3 metres tall. So as we can see, he'll build up fairly good traction, but not great. It's only about halfway, which is kind of ironic because he's racing in an ice level.
You're gonna lose unless you upgrade your pod racer, I think.
And speaking of upgrades, Beedo's handling will actually turn out pretty solid. His acceleration, on the other hand, is round about the same as Rat's Tyrell's. It's not going to be anything fantastic. We will get some decent improvements, but as we can see, we start to build up to some fairly good top speed with just a plug 8. Those engines have plenty of power behind them. Braking will be adequate, more than adequate with a quadrajet. And the cooling system will fare pretty well overall, round about average. Repair it'll generally hold him out pretty well, and he'll be able to keep that pod racer of his in good condition. Well, Aldar Beedo put in a pretty good effort, all things considered, actually getting a bit faster for the most part as things went on. The first 2 laps were pretty terrible if I'm going to be honest, and even then, though he pushed hard, Beedo doesn't quite have the best time going around. He has come in at 2 minutes 4.023 seconds, which is putting him right towards the bottom of the board, down in the dismal section with Sebulba. It must be that poor acceleration that is hindering Aldar Beedo. Nonetheless, he can put in a pretty good effort. We'll just have to see what happens on tracks that actually suit those big engines of his maybe sometime in the near future. For now, though, let's get ready to take a look at Mawhonic. Mawhonic, a Gran from the planet Hawk, had a distinguished and noteworthy pod racing career despite what critics considered an extremely poor pod racer. Evidently, it did well enough for Mawhonic, and he set several record times with his admittedly fast racer. He was well known on Ryloth, Malistar and Ando Prime, where he was track favourite on Andobi Mountain Run. Mawhonic also made a living selling pod racer parts, which we can only hope were better than those Watto tends to sell. Worth noting, Mawhonic didn't take Republic credits either. Sebulba actually considered Mawhonic a potential threat as a pod racer, and further despised him due to being a Gran. Given the Grans had effectively taken over Malistar around 1000 BBY and enslaved the Dugs, one can't quite blame Sebulba for being angry. For what it's worth, Mawhonic would become angry in Sebulba's presence, though normally he was quite well mannered. During races, Mawhonic and Gasgano would often work together, or attempt to anyway, in order to bring down Sebulba. However, they had no association outside of races as they couldn't stand the other's personalities. Mawhonic probably could have used a bit of help during the Boonta Classic as Sebulba rammed him off the track in the first lap, condemning Mawhonic to a particularly brutal crash. Somehow, Mawhonic survived the devastating explosion, which really makes Rats Tyrell feel a lot worse because everyone else was allowed to survive. The utterly furious Mawhonic would put bounties on at least 2 of Sebulba's relatives, and these were claimed on Malistar by Jango Fett, who does pop up a little bit here and there. No word on whether he brought them in warm or cold, by the way. In addition to this, Mawhonic managed to get back on the circuit with the same model of pod racer he had used before, catching Sebulba by surprise during the Winter Harvest Classic. Convinced he had killed the Gran, Sebulba accused him of being an imposter, but this was indeed the genuine deal, and rumours circulated that an imposter Mawhonic had died in the Boonta Classic. Regardless of what the truth was, Mawhonic was alive and racing still, continuing his career into 22 BBY. Mawhonic's pod racer is an unusual GPE 3130 designed by Galactic Power Engineering. The two GPE Thrustmaster 9000 Aerospike rocket engines have small ramjets mounted on them. They provide boost power and extra manoeuvring, but the design was apparently considered very awkward and ungainly anyway. The engines needed constant maintenance, the fuel they used was extremely volatile, which made the pod racer rather dangerous, the handling was apparently pretty horrible, and the controls were awkward. Plus the seating was uncomfortable, which is just problematic. That said, it is apparently fairly fast, sporting a top speed of 775 km an hour. The actual length stats of the vehicle are unknown. There's pretty decent traction, the acceleration is not great, and the top speed can be a bit shoddy. The braking isn't very good as well. Turning doesn't start out great, but the cooling is okay. Mainly because of those massive air intakes on the front of it. So let's check out what Mawhonic can do when his pod gets going. As far as traction goes, Mawhonic will be fairly capable. Nothing outstanding, but not anything shoddy. His handling will actually turn out pretty well. As for his acceleration, it's pretty much the same as the racers who came before him. He's not going to get anything spectacular out of these parts. On the other hand, he does start to jump up a bit when it comes to top speed, but he's not quite as fast as you'd think. He will still need the Block 6, as we can see, to hit top speed, but it's near as makes no difference with a Block 5. His air brakes will be serviceable, not outstanding compared to some of the ones we've seen. Cooling systems will remain fairly capable, which allows him to boost pretty well. As we can see with those big air vents, and the repair systems will generally keep his pod in pretty good nick. Another set of hot laps completed, and we have some interesting results. Mawhonic seems to be a little bit more agile than Aldar Beedo before him. Put in some pretty good efforts there, but I think that poor acceleration off the line is again a bit of a problem. Mawhonic's time comes in at 2 minutes 3.358 seconds, which is unfortunately not quite enough to beat Rats Tyrell, putting him in the bottom so far. But there are plenty more races to come, so who knows where Mawhonic and Aldar Beedo will end up at the end of all this. That will wrap things up for this particular episode. Next time we will be covering Ark Bumpy Roos and Wan Sandage. Thank you very much for joining me. Until next time, this is Red 2 returning to base. May the Force be with you.